Hello, I'm the Oliver Picard and welcome to gorgeous Limousin, France. In today's video I'm going to be sharing with you 6 things that you may be doing that may be damaging your car. But before I get started, I just want to say that no one should ever have a go at you for not knowing something. We aren't all born with an encyclopedic knowledge of mechanics or engines or cars or any of that. And we all learn by a process. And no one should ever make you feel ashamed for not knowing anything. So if you are doing something on this list that is hurting your car, and you didn't know, don't worry about it. You didn't know, and no one should ever make you feel bad for not knowing. So this video isn't designed to do that. I don't want you to feel ashamed if you're doing one or several of the things that are discussed in this video that are wrong. It's simply a way for you to be more educated and for you to save your car and educate yourself for the future. And it's simply a way to, like I say, learn to look after your car better and to save yourself money and save yourself time and save yourself effort and literally have a better automotive experience. The first of these things on my list is lack of maintenance. Now, there is obvious maintenance, things like checking your coolant, checking your oil, checking your brake pads, checking your tyres, but then we have major services such as changing the oil altogether, changing the gearbox oil altogether. If you have a differential in your car and not like a transaxle, changing the differential oil. We have many fluids in our car, and these fluids need changing the coolant when the coolant needs changing. And how do you know when your coolant needs changing? Well, if you change all your fluids when you buy your car, then you know when they've been changed. You know for sure. And you buy a little notebook, and you stick a little notebook in your glove box, and you write in the date. And you write, 20th of whatever, 2019, today changed gearbox oil, differential oil, coolant, engine oil, this, that, and the other. And then you write next to it when's the next time it needs to be done. Depending on what oil you buy, depending on what car you drive, things need doing at certain intervals. And your owner's manual or your workshop manual, like a Haynes workshop manual or a Chilton workshop manual, will let you know when's the next time that should be done. I know people who have bought cars and who have done exactly what I've just said. They've changed all the fluids and they've realised that their car is several years old or even several decades old and the oil has never been changed. And just because a car has really low miles on it, if a car is 40 years old and it's done 20,000 miles in its lifetime, or whatever, 50,000, 60,000 kilometres, the oil still needs changing because it breaks down over time. And if you give things a really good service and you know when they've been serviced, then you know that you can keep up a regular service interval then. And it gives you a good record to go off. Things like belts and stuff like that. If a belt looks old, if a belt looks tired, if a belt is, slipping, then replace it and make a note of when it was replaced. And then that way you can always be on top of your own maintenance, even if you get someone else to do it, even if you have a really good mechanic. If you keep a book in that car, your mechanic knows, your local mechanic, if you go to the same guy all the time and he's really good at what he does and he's really reliable. I always say really good reliable mechanics are worth paying. Specialists, marque specialists, are very expensive, but they are worth every penny because they know every single millimetre of that car. And if you have a really good record of what's happened to your car and your ownership of that car, then you can help them to help you. The next thing I'm going to talk about is batteries. If you have a classic car, it came with a lead acid battery. Now then, today, the most common battery out there is what's called a calcium battery. A calcium battery is still a lead acid battery, but it has a calcium silver lead alloy as the plates. It's still a lead acid battery, but they are sealed for life. Do not fit a sealed for life battery in your classic car. And the reason I tell you not to fit one of these batteries to your car is There is no way in heck an old-fashioned alternator, an older alternator, or an old dynamo is going to be able to kick out 14.4 to 14.8 volts in order to charge that battery properly. A calcium battery requires that much power, and if it doesn't receive that much power to charge it, then it builds up what's called sulfites on the plates. This leads the battery to age very prematurely and very rapidly. So it doesn't matter if it's a really good expensive one. If you have a calcium battery on a classic car, it's not going to last long. And I've actually experienced this with boats. And my first yacht that I bought when I was a teenager, I was 19 when I got it. The guy had just fitted a brand new battery, and just after I bought it, the battery actually exploded in the boat. Luckily, it was an old boat, and it had a lead-lined battery box that was vented. And so the explosion was actually contained, but the battery cracked in half, and there was a massive bang. And luckily, I was on board when it happened. But if that's your car, that could burn your car down. And the reason is the battery charger in the boat was an old-fashioned battery charger. It was from the early 80s, and it was literally just not charging the battery sufficiently. This built up sulfite. I didn't know this about batteries at the time. And like I say, everybody does stuff wrong. And I rang up my friend who's an electrical specialist, and I said, "Lucas, my battery's just exploded." And he said, "Well, is it a sealed for life battery?" And I'm like, yeah, it was. It came with the boat. And he's like, yeah, they do that. And it's that common. I know multiple people who've had this problem, and it could literally burn your car down. The best thing to do is contact a classic battery specialist and get the right battery for your car. They will be able to advise you on what's the best battery to get. Like I say, even if your dynamo can be adjusted to kick out 14.4 to 14.8 volts, your battery regulator won't allow it. Your voltage regulator in your car won't allow that. Even if you've got a classic car that's fitted with a more modern alternator, and if you're going to go for a sealed for life battery, you're much better with a glass fiber battery, which is known as an AGM battery, which is a much more modern battery. Although they need charging, if you use a battery tender, they need a special sort of digital battery tender that can charge them at very low voltage, and they don't like being overcharged. They're kind of the total opposite, but much more suited to a classic car. I know that many people use Optima batteries and stuff like that, and they are much more suited than a sealed for life calcium battery. There is absolutely nothing wrong with a good lead acid battery that is well maintained and topped up regularly with distilled water. You can have years and years of use out of it, and it's worth paying good money for a really good battery. You really do get what you pay for. And like I say, it's the maintenance of your car after all. It's the use of your car. 42% of call-outs to roadside assistance people like the AA are because of battery issues. So getting yourself a really good battery, making sure your charging system's working and stuff like that is vital. And the basis of that is a good, dependable battery. The next one on the list is synthetic oil in a classic car. A lot of people think, oh, synthetic oil must be better because it's modern, and modern is better. Modern is better for a modern engine, but the oil gaps in your car, the spacings between all the components, were designed for the oil of the period. So, for instance, a Model T has a huge oil gap. They're all slack and baggy fitting, and the reason is the oil of the time was really thick. So you can run a nice thick oil, and it gives everything a nice space, because the metal components inside a car might look like they touch, but they don't. Everything has the tiniest little gap in it. The reason for this gap is it allows oil to fit between the two metal components so that you never get metal on metal. The oil removes heat from the internal components of your engine, and it also lubricates. And the oil gap is massively important. And if you run an oil that's too thin for the oil gap, it's going to cause vibration inside the engine. Worse than that, all the oil seals of the period were designed for a specific thickness of oil. So if you run a super thin oil, you're literally going to have oil seeping out of every orifice on your engine. It's not good for your engine, it makes your car a mess. Don't do it. Similarly, if you have a modern car, don't run an old-fashioned super thick oil in your car. Your engine oil is one thing, your gearbox's oil is another thing. My suggestion is to contact a classic oil specialist, or just buy, classic car oil, and read up on what you're supposed to have. It will tell you in your manual what you're supposed to use in your car. Oils designed for classic cars are better. The reason for that is in super old stuff, like especially gearbox oil, in super old gearboxes there can be bronze bushes and things like that. A bush is a bit like a bearing, but it doesn't have balls or needles, it just doesn't move, and it needs the correct oil in order to lubricate it. But modern oils can actually attack the bronze and disintegrate it over time and damage your gearbox. So make sure that if you are if it's an 80 weight 90 oil or something like that, that it's the correct oil for the era of your car. Like I said, the best thing you can use is oil designed for classic cars, and make sure you check your owner's manual or you check your workshop manual and find out what oil you're supposed to be using in your classic car and use that oil. Modern cars, it usually says it on the oil filler cap on the engine. The other thing about oil is that when you start your car, don't just start the car and drive. Like, sit there for a few seconds, just let her warm up a bit before you drive. And if you're going to be driving spiritedly, then please drive for a little bit of time, let the gearbox oil warm up, let the engine oil warm up before you start caning it. Simply because it's really important that, especially, think about it, if you've got a tall engine, and your engine's been sat overnight, if your pistons run this way, like a BMW straight six, say, all your engine oil is in the bottom of the engine in the sump, and when you turn the engine on, there's no oil in the top. There's a very thin skin, but not much, and the oil pump has to pump oil from the bottom of the engine to the top of the engine to lubricate the top, and then it all runs down. So when you start your car, just give your car a couple of seconds before you start revving it or accelerating or anything, just to lubricate that oil round. Let the gearbox oil lubricate the gearbox before you put it in gear and you drive off. And if you're going to be driving spiritedly, like I say, just give it a few minutes to warm up and make sure she's all warmed through. If your car's equipped with a temperature gauge, that's much easier to do than in a classic car. In a classic car, just be conservative, let her warm up slowly, and like I said, let the engine get to a really good temperature before you start driving it. It will make your engine last much, much longer, and your engine will thank you for it, and it will hold power better throughout its lifetime. Obviously, engines lose power throughout the years, but if you treat your car right and if you treat your engine right, it won't lose power as quickly, and like I say, you'll have many more years of driving pleasure out of your engine than if you'd treated a mean. The next thing on the list, number 4, is bottled water in your radiator. Now then, years and years ago, I went to a car show and I saw in the back of a Bullnose Morris big 5-litre bottles of bottled water, and these people were topping up a 1920s car with bottled water in the radiator. Now, if you look in the bottom of your kettle at home, you'll notice that it gets the calcification on the bottom of the kettle. And if you've watched like adverts on TV and stuff for dishwashers or washing machines or anything, they always talk about calcification of parts and the fact that it all gets gummed up. And your car will do exactly the same thing if you put bottled water in your radiator. Never, ever, ever put bottled water in a car. Please, just really, really don't do it, right? The best thing that you can use if you're in a pinch is distilled water. You can find distilled water in like the home section of of your local supermarket where the cleaning products are and stuff like that. It's available in big 5-litre jugs. It's really, really cheap, and it's designed to put in your iron at home. You know, your like clothes iron. And what it is, it's mega filtered water with no calcium in it and all that stuff. That's the very minimum of what you should be using in your car. Although I will say to you, modern fuel burns really hot. it burns a lot hotter. Fuel's actually changed massively, and it's different depending on where you live in the world. But fuel has changed over the years, and it burns a lot hotter than it did in the 60s or the 70s, even the 80s, and definitely more than it did in the 20s. And so your car needs better cooling than it had then. How can you give your car better cooling than it had way back when? The best thing that you can do is use a really good coolant. There are multiple different sorts of coolant, and the best thing you can do is find out. Your owner's manual should tell you what sort of coolant you should be using. If you have an aluminium engine, or aluminium components in your engine, you need to use an aluminium safe coolant. That will stop your engine getting damaged. What does coolant do? Why is coolant better than water? Basically, it doesn't boil off as quickly as water does. As soon as water hits 100 degrees, it starts to boil and it evaporates. And it freezes as well. And if you have water inside your engine and you're in cold weather, the water inside the engine, when water freezes, it actually expands. And literally, if you park your car outside, you've just got distilled water in your radiator. It can crack your radiator, but it can actually crack the cast iron engine block of a car. Seriously, that's how forceful expanding water is. It can crack the block. It can do all sorts of damage to your car. In a pinch, distilled water is okay. You should, though, run coolant. In hot weather, water will boil. Coolant is much more stable. It's much more resistant to boiling, and it's much more resistant to freezing. Some coolants more than others. Like I say, you get what you pay for. And coolant lasts a lot longer in your engine, although you still need to check it. You can also buy, and this is what I would suggest for classic car enthusiasts, anyone with a classic car, you can also buy waterless coolant. Evans make it. If you Google Evans waterless coolant, they're not paying me. They're not. I'm just suggesting this because it's the best thing. Waterless coolant is a lifetime product. You put it in your engine. There's a pre-run through first that gets rid of all the calcium and stuff out of your engine that your engine may have. Because if your engine's had bottled water in it, the inside of your engine will look like a coral reef, and it will gum up all your coolant passages in your engine. It will gum up all your water pump. It will knacker everything up. It will gum up all the little channels in your radiator. Jolene doesn't have a radiator; she's air cooled. But if you have a water cooled car, like I say, the bottled water will knacker everything up, and you can get stuff to remove that. And the waterless coolant comes with that, a thing that washes it all through first. Then you put your waterless coolant in, and waterless coolant doesn't boil until it's massively, massively hot. So it continues to get rid of that heat. It continues to cool your engine even above 100 degrees Celsius, that is, of radiator temperature. And even on the hottest day, your engine should stay cool and should stay cooling itself. And it's literally the best thing for your car, and it actually might save you from blowing a head gasket. It might save your car, and it could save you tens of thousands of pounds or euros or dollars. It's really that important. I mean, if your engine block cracks in half, it's a whole new engine. And if you blow a head gasket, it's an engine rebuild. If the head's aluminium on your engine, then you'll need a new head. It's massive. It's a massive amount of work to do. But it can all be saved by simply using the correct coolant or waterless coolant in your engine. And waterless coolant doesn't expand or contract with heat or cold, so it's much less likely that you'll blow a hose. It's a much, much more stable thing, and your engine will thank you. It's not the most expensive thing in the world, and compared to the price of engine damage, it's a massive bargain. And like I say, if your engine's overheating, in a pinch, get distilled water. And the next thing I want to talk about on this list is fuel. Now then, if you have a modern car, it will tell you what fuel you need to be running. It will tell you if you need to use a higher octane fuel, a premium fuel, or whether you can get away with running the economy stuff. And because it's all worked out, and a computer works out the fueling as you drive along, it looks at how high, what altitude you're at, what temperature you're at, all that kind of thing, and it gives the engine the fuel that it should be having, or the fuel that the map says it should be having, the computer. But we use carburetors on classic cars, and I always suggest to people that they use premium. The reason I suggest premium is, in my experience, it runs a lot cleaner, it doesn't gum up carburetors as much, and you get much better fuel economy. It doesn't become varnishy the same as a lot of cheaper fuels do. Cheaper fuels, they tend to gum up fuel filters and that kind of thing, and it's just nasty. Whereas using a premium fuel is a little bit more expensive, but actually it's a better economy and you use less of it. And I just think it's a much better thing for your engine. And like I say, in my experience, it actually saves you money. Also, if you have an electric fuel pump in your car, if your car's a more modern car from the even 70s through to today, don't drive around with a low amount of fuel in your fuel tank. If you have an electric fuel pump in your car, the pump is cooled by the fuel that's in the tank. So by having a full fuel tank, you're actually saving your fuel pump. And fuel pumps can run to hundreds of euros. And if you're paying a mechanic, they've got to pull all the fuel tank out your car, and it's a right mess. Another thing I will say is, if you have a car that sits for long periods of time, the fuel these days, modern fuel, goes off really quickly. It used to be that you could pull a car out of a garage that had been in there for 20 years and you could start it on the fuel that was in the tank. Modern fuel will be off, it will go bad in about 6 months, even less, depending on the ambient temperature and stuff like that. You can actually buy fuel that you put, it's like in a little tiny bottle, and you can add it to your fuel tank, and it will stop the fuel in there going bad, or you can replace it with this additive fuel, and that will stop it all going bad. If your fuel goes bad, you'll have to replace your fuel filter, and you'll have to drain all your tank and clean all your fuel tank out, and then replace it with good fuel. I was told the other week, there was a girl that rang me up, and she said, the fuel's gone bad in my fuel tank, and my dad has told me to put white spirit in the fuel, like paint thinner. And I'm like, whatever you do, do not do that. Don't add stuff that's not designed to be added to your fuel. Don't do stuff like that. The best way to sort a problem out like that is to literally do it the right way. And there is only one right way. The right way to solve bad fuel is to drain the tank, replace your fuel filter. Fuel filters aren't massively expensive. Clean out your fuel line and literally do it properly. And then put new fuel in your car. To stop that happening, if you know that your car is going to be laid up for any amount of time, make sure that you put, like I said, the special fuel in it. It's not very expensive. You don't need a lot of it, but make sure you buy it and then you run your engine for a little amount of time just to let it go through to the carburetor and through to the fuel filter, and it will stop the carburetor jets in your carburetor getting all gummed up. It will stop your fuel filter getting all gummed up. It will stop your fuel line getting gummed up, and it will stop it getting all varnishy and horrible in your fuel tank. It's really, really important. So yeah, if you have an electric fuel pump, make sure that you don't drive around on really low fuel because you'll wreck your fuel pump. Make sure that if your car is sitting, that you add the correct nice fuel that will stop it going bad. The best thing that you can do for your car though is drive it often and regularly and keep fresh fuel in there. Keep her topped up, keep driving her, and she should be absolutely fine. Whether you need lead additive in there or not is up to when your car was made, what model your car is, all that kind of thing. If you do put lead additive in your car, if your car needs it, you can also have hardened valve seats fitted by an engineering specialist, and that will allow you to use normal proper fuel. But whatever, no matter what compression your engine is, I suggest that you always use premium in a classic. In my experience, they just run better and cleaner on it, and they will give you a better automotive experience. And the sixth thing on this list is heavy key rings, specifically your car keys. Now, I know a bunch of people who get their car keys out and they've got this giant bunch of keys. They look like a jailer. And they've got like the car keys, they've got the shed keys, they've got the house keys, they've got car keys from other cars, and then they've got like a big billet aluminium, you know, Subaru Impreza keychain on there or whatever. And the car keys are heavy. They're heavy in your hand. And then they put those keys in the ignition of a car, and all that weight is a lever inside your ignition, and it will destroy your ignition barrel. The best thing to do is buy a key separator, and fit the key separator to your key ring, and when you go to get in your car, just disconnect your ignition key and pop it in your ignition, turn your car on. So there's only the weight of the key and the little tiny key separator. It's that simple. You can pop a clip on there, a carabiner or whatever, but you won't have all the weight of your keys trying to basically pushing its way into your ignition barrel. Ignition barrels can be incredibly expensive. New keys can be incredibly expensive, especially if you have a rare or expensive car, especially if things like this are hard to get. You'll have to go to a specialist who will rebuild it all. It's a nightmare. And the last thing that you want to do is jump in your car, go to turn your ignition on, and it not turn on because your key's knackered or the ignition barrel's knackered. Or a thief can steal your car with basically a screwdriver because you've worn your ignition barrel out, because every time you put your keys in, your keys do this inside the ignition barrel. So it makes your car safer, and it just basically stops you breaking your ignition. It's a safety thing. Like your car can cut out if your keys are jumping around in the ignition because the heavy keychains wallowed out all your ignition barrel. It's not a good thing. So if you've got a heavy bunch of keys in your pocket, it's time for a change. It's time to either buy a key separator or slim down your keys and have multiple sets of keys or something like that. I know I'm as bad as anybody. I have a big brass diver's helmet on my key ring. Luckily, Jolene has a big shelf, and I put the keys on the shelf, and then my key ring's on a little extender, and I just I just put the key in and turn it on. Classic car keys tend to be very small, you know, VW Beetle keys, 2CV keys are tiny for earlier cars, and it doesn't take a lot of weight and it doesn't take a lot of strain to break the key or to actually break the ignition barrel. The last thing you want to do though is to snap your key off inside your ignition barrel. That's an expensive and annoying thing to have. Ooh, it's windy. I always say if you look after your car will always look after you. And if you liked this video, please let me know by clicking the like button down below. It also lets YouTube know. And if you have a friend who is new to cars or does any of these things, please send them this video and save their car. Their car will thank you, and hopefully they will too. Or your friend just might find it entertaining. If you're new to this channel, which 75% of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed, please go down there, click the subscribe button. There's also a button at the end of this video that looks like my head, so you can click on my head, and that will let you know you have a little subscriptions folder in your YouTube on the YouTube homepage. When you go into YouTube, there's like 3 little options down on the side. The third one down is subscriptions. If you go in there, then my video will appear every time you upload one. And if you want a notification, there's a bell next to the subscribe button, and that way every time you log into YouTube it will say Oliver's uploaded a video, and you'll be able to watch it. But if you enjoyed this video and you just want more, there will be suggested videos at the end of this one, and obviously in the sidebar and all that stuff. So thank you for watching. Please be awesome to each other, and please be awesome to your engines, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye.